Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B, and football is finally here. We had heat acclimation last week. 2-a-days have begun for high school now. This week, so Matt, why don't you fill us in? How's that been going? And what are you focusing on with your 2-day practices?
Well, we cleared our heat acclimation, which went extremely well, and now we just finished up our second day of 2-a-day practices, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say it, but I feel like we're doing extremely well for where we're at as a program. I was a little bit skeptical because I keep having that feeling like when's the wheels going to fall off? When's the really bad thing going to happen? But so far we've been very fortunate that we've had 4 great practices this week so far. A little bit rainy yesterday, but we're handling the changes well. Actually, one of the things that surprised me was that yesterday, for as wet and rainy as practice was, I didn't have to do any additional conditioning as far as kids kicking mud on each other and all that nonsense that sometimes happens at practice. So I was super, super excited that we're having that maturity and understanding of what we need to do and being focused. So I'm very, very pleased right now.
Well, when it rains, that's usually the best time to teach your quarterback how to slide. So did you do any of that?
No, we did not.
Why not? You could easily be injured, Matt. Didn't you battle that last year?
I did do that.
It's all about prevention. You know me, I blame player injuries 100% on the coach.
Yeah, you would.
Hey, I'm still better because Christian McCaffrey last year ruined my fantasy football season. And then he didn't even play in the preseason this year, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But then they kept just making excuses on the TV broadcast, and it was driving me nuts. But in terms of preparation, how important is it to get ready? Because you guys have a scrimmage on Saturday, right?
Right.
So how important is it, do you think, to get those game speed reps as we watch NFL players basically not even play this entire first week of preseason?
I think it's somewhat important. I think especially for kids who, for whatever reason, don't show up to some of the summer workouts, I think it's important to have some of those practices where they're seeing what it's like live. I think for the quarterbacks, it helps when you have some of those, you have a pass rush and they start to realize I don't have all day to stand back there like I did in the summer for 7-on-7. And even though you're obviously not getting your quarterback hit during practice, they're still feeling that pressure and starting to get used to, okay, I know my mental clock says I have to throw the football now. I have to get the ball out of my hand, and understanding things like that. Or even as far as you're teaching your timing to the running back. So this is where you need to hit the hole, and you can walk through it all you want, but until you see how the linemen are going to pull and how they're going to get to their blocks, it's tough to really get a good feel for it.
Now, coaching at a smaller school, are you ever worried about, you hear they start to call them pitch counts, which don't make sense considering that's a baseball term, but I've heard it a lot over this past weekend where certain players only have a snap count where they're only able to play so many plays before they get pulled because they're afraid of getting injured. Do you have any concerns over that? Because if you played a bigger school, they could be cycling in fresh players while your guys are just beat at the end of the scrimmage.
Well, I think part of it is when I go into a scrimmage, I'm looking at there's always a couple positions, and we have a couple line spots and a couple running back positions right now that there's some guys that are jockeying for position. And I look at what are you going to do with the opportunities that you have? I want to try to get as many different people on tape as I can. And what matters to me is being able to see when you have somebody else from a different color jersey on, what kind of effort do we get? Because, sometimes with practice, some kids look at well, I'm going up against my best friend and I don't want to embarrass them. So I'm going to take it easier on them. And I'm sure when you played, you had that cutthroat mentality that you were trying to just bury everyone every play.
Well, hold on first. That's called being competitive. So I don't think that has to worry about it. Because you see players all the time. I know we talked about it over the summer where people are giving heavy hits. I mean, my man, Jabril Peppers, he got in trouble. So I had that same mentality where you're out there. You got to play hard. Otherwise, if you practice weak, I think that's where a lot of people get injured. Because then they're in the game speed and they're not used to it. Because I think that messes with your mind. That's why I like whenever they have just like the touch practices or whatever. Because I hate the ones where you have to wrap up. Because I think whenever you're wrapping up, that's just teaching you bad technique. And I don't know if you employ that or not, so I don't want to offend you. But
no, but I think there's ways that you can do that where, like for the linemen, you can say full on with the line, but then once they get to the second level, thud up, so that you're running to the ball, you're getting guys pursuing to the ball carrier, and you're not driving them to the ground. Because sometimes that's where you get injuries when you go full live, that they clear the offensive line, and then they get to the second level and a linebacker rolls a knee or rolls an ankle, and I think it just puts you at a higher risk of injury. So a lot of times for the line, they're unfortunately they got to go live because they're playing the more physical position, and you can kind of baby the skill guys a little bit more.
see, I think the thought up is the one that I think worries me the most. Because outside of like the game where you can like break a bone or you see a lot of leg injuries, I think at practice or like some of the weird ones, the collarbone injury has been the one that even in my playing days, thinking back now, I know at least a handful of players that had collarbone issues that I think if you, and I don't know if it's just from practicing where you're usually standing up when you do the thud up, and then in the game, a guy hits you there and it's just game over with the helmet, or it's like a weird angle or something. That's why I liked the new approach where a lot of coaches are just having you slap them with your hand. Because like in the game, you're never going to do that. So like you're not even doing like a half-ass technique to just hit pads or whatever. And so I'm all for that because I think you're going to be fresher and you can still practice tackling on like the tackling dummies. I don't know if you guys have the donuts or whatever, but I think that had just started whenever I played, and that was like 15, 20 years ago. I don't even know how many years ago that was now. Not 20. 10? I don't know. I'd have to do the math. But I don't even remember how old I am. That's how bad it is on the show.
Well, we do have the donuts, but I think there's nothing. You have to have periods where you're just hitting live, or at least teaching the live tackling, because it's just for a lot of kids and a lot of players, it's something that's very unnatural. And my own personal belief is that, you see these videos and it turns my stomach where you see these youth videos where you have the coach that's like screaming in the player's face and slapping them upside the head and probably giving them concussions, like just from hitting them before the drill starts. And then they do the old Oklahoma where they line up like 10, 15 yards away and just run them into each other.
Well, that was the old Les Miles thing. Like, whenever his scandal broke, that was one of the things that we talked about where he had players that were in trouble with the law or whatever, and instead he's like, we'll handle this in-house, and then he had them like try to, I think the one guy had robbed someone or something, and so he just had them do an Oklahoma drill against each other to try to solve their problem. I'm like, how old school of a mentality is that where you think, all right, you robbed that guy? All right, go ahead out there. You're going to hit each other a few times. And if you're the losing end where you're the one that got robbed and then you get your ass kicked at practice, like, how do you feel about your life? Like, oh, I learned nothing here. Like, if it was some like smaller player and he's like picking on like the star, like the stud linebacker or something, like, he's going to get his ass kicked at practice, and maybe that punishment makes sense, but I don't know if that was the case. I can't remember, but some of the physical things, like I remember doing those in like youth where you were just practicing like over and over. And still some of the times I wonder like, man, I know like, like I was even talking to my brother and he was saying about how his knees messed up from football and things like that. And it's like, I wonder how many other people have just nagging injuries from just taking hits after hits after hits. Because when I played, all practice was like that. And by the time you got to the game, you were just destroyed. That's why I'll call out Harbaugh, because I honestly think whenever he had came into Michigan, if you watched his teams and how he talked about hitting at practice every week, by week 10, the players are dead. Like, you can't, maybe in the Pac-12 that worked when he was at Stanford because of the way their schedule is and their teams aren't as physical out west. But like in the Big Ten, when you're hammering your body all week at practice and then you're playing Wisconsin and 5 guys get injured. That's why I joked earlier about like it's being on the coach. Like, some of it is a scheme thing where you're like, come on, coach. Like, you got to give me some rest. And that's why the SEC is smart by having those late cupcake games, because they're not for warm-ups or whatever. They're just for not playing your starters to give them some more rest. I'm surprised other conferences don't recognize that. Too much for the money, I guess. But anything else you want to hit on for 2 days before we're getting the NFL stuff?
The only other thing for 2 days, I think that I hope that I'm not alone in this, but I always look at different drills to try to see, like, what can we get better at. And one of the things that I did this year, as far as like trying to get our tackling better, is putting together some drills as far as like the screens and being able to block on the perimeter, because a lot of kids struggle with blocking in space. So we tried to implement a new drill this year that it actually ended up going over really, really well, and I filmed it. So it was kind of a cool thing to see, where we had some different stations and players were rotating through, and I felt like we really got some good work, and most importantly, we stayed healthy and didn't get injured. And it's tough when you're at a much larger school, and hypothetically, if you're at a school that you have so many athletes that you have to cut, it makes sense to have the physical practices and to do all that stuff, because you want to try to weed out some of those guys anyhow. But for a small school, you kind of have to be careful of how much contact do you do versus preparing your kids. Because if you go too physical and you injure a bunch of your starters, then you're no further ahead when the season starts, because you got to play either guys that shouldn't be in that position or can't play the position, and it's still going to put you at a disadvantage. So you got to be smart with how you're hitting.
Yeah, that's true. I do have some bad news for you, though. The screen is considered a passing play, Matt, so I don't know if you'll ever run that in the game. You have to actually pass the ball.
That hurts. I've had 1,000-yard passers.
All I want to see is a balanced passing and rushing attack, Matt. That's all I ask. I think that would be very successful.
Well, that's all you have to do is just watch our film, you turd.
I do watch them. I don't see any speed and space out there. That's the main thing. Mike Leach would have been shaking his head in disgust.
Well, it's not from a lack of trying, let me tell you.
I know. I often wonder, because like sometimes if you watch even high school film, when they have these quarterbacks coming out that are highly ranked, and most of their passes are like under 5 yards, it's almost like, hey, like, do you ever throw the ball deep? Like, is he able to do that? And then you see guys that they barely have any accuracy, but all their completions are deep passes, and everyone's like salivating over them. And I just wonder if sometimes scouts just wonder, like, all right, if I don't see it on the film, the guy can't pass more than like 10 yards, so we're not going to recruit him. Like, they'd rather have a guy that they can actually throw the ball deep. So, I don't know. That's my theory lately.
On that note, I did hear, and I wish I could remember what podcast I had heard it on, but a college coach was talking about how with the way that he recruits quarterbacks, he wants to see them on campus. And I totally agree that if I were to coach at the college level, I think I would have a hard time trying to scholarship matter that I'm just watching off of film alone, because I think you could be playing as the big fish in your conference small pond and look like a superstar, and then get on campus and be an absolute dud. And I think that helps a lot of players, that if you have the opportunity to get on campus to be able to showcase in front of the coaches what you can do, I think you stand a better chance of getting higher in the recruiting.
What do you think of the player that from Texas that is going to not play high school football and enroll in Ohio State instead, or enroll at Ohio State. Did you see that?
I did see, and I just think that's one of those power moves that you see happen with the NILs.
You're breaking up a little bit.
If you can cash in, I said if you can cash in on it, I don't see an issue with it. Take advantage of it while you can.
Well, just so I don't forget about it, did you see the BYU ones where they're paying for all of their walk-ons? So it kind of eliminates the actual scholarship benefit. And so anyone that's on full scholarship, I want to say they're getting $1,000. I don't know if it's a month or if it's like whatever as like a benefit, while all the other walk-ons are getting their scholarships paid for out of pocket by whatever their sponsor is. And I saw a couple states were kind of speaking out against it because in their state, it would be illegal for whatever reason. I don't know why. But that's going to be one of the crazy things with like the NILs is that they try to reel them in. How do you know like a big school like that? Because everyone keeps knocking BYU. Oh, if BYU joins a conference, that conference is basically dead and all this stuff. Like, no, they legitimately have a rabid fan base bigger than a lot of other schools. So if you're like knocking on BYU, like you really don't know football. Like a lot of these other guys, like from the smaller schools, like if you really think that Wake Forest or even the ACC that's averaging, I mean, such a pathetic amount of fans, like look at Pitt Stadium and then tell me whatever their announced, whatever capacity is. Like, oh, Pitt has 50,000 fans here and the stadium's completely empty. Like, you know, they're just lying. BYU doesn't have that problem. Like even North Carolina with Mac Brown down here, I watched a bunch of games, and you could go to a game basically very cheap, almost free if you really wanted to, and parking's very available. There's no one at the games. So like, I think that fans in the stand is a big thing that they're going to be looking for with some of this NIL stuff, and a lot of schools that people think that are going to make the money. I wonder how much of that actually falls through because who's going to advertise on the field, you know, without people watching? I don't know. Let's get into the NFL stuff, though. We'll get into college here in a little bit. The preseason, like I had said, everyone keeps talking about the television deals and how the streaming is going to be the next big thing. I hate how the NFL isn't trying to lead that. Like, I tried to watch the Steelers. I only caught a very little bit of it because they sold the game. The NFL did, or I don't know if they do it by team. I would assume that the NFL had negotiated all their TV rights together, but they sold it to the local broadcast team, so you could only see it if you were in Pennsylvania. The only preseason game I got down here last week was the Panthers game that I had talked about, where they came out, they did a whole presentation on that the first team wasn't playing. It was like a public service announcement. It was like, hey, if you're watching this game, these are not the starters. Let's show you our starters on the sideline. And I'm not even joking, Matt. They start with like, here's Christian McCaffrey. Oh yeah, he was injured last year and he did like played in barely any games. And then they told me the stat where they said he missed 13 games, almost the entire season. But when he did play, Matt, he made them miss. He had 40 something. It was like 40 or 50 missed tackles. And I thought, how would that give me any confidence in fantasy to get him again on my team? Because when he did play, you're telling me that he was in position to get killed and he had to make 40 people miss in like 5 games or however many games that was? Like, that's a ridiculous amount of hits. No wonder he was injured every time. Like, no wonder he came back and was like injured again. What kind of scheme is that? So then I was like, all right, yeah, definitely not keeping him. And I wouldn't even be announcing him. And then I had talked about, we don't know what their quarterback situation is going to be. They had, was it PJ Walker, the guy from the XFL?
The XFL, baby.
So he looked pretty good, but there were a lot of drops. He had some like accuracy issues on the run, which that's to be expected, different football and stuff. But we didn't see Sam Darnold, and we know how many mistakes he could make. So like I could very easily see the Panthers being like a garbage team. and like McCaffrey just getting run into the ground. And then they also did a little special on how his contract, he's in his second contract. This is when most running backs start to get worn down, but that's not going to happen for him because they showed a workout that he did where he was like crawling on the ground. I kid you not. And I thought, is this supposed to excite me? I've seen babies crawl on the ground. Like, what is that supposed to do? I want to see my guys jumping out of pools, Matt, showing me some explosiveness, not just crawling on the ground. So it was a very weird preseason game. And I don't know if every team did that, but like just to have, hey, we're going to talk to our starters. And every single starter said the same thing. Hey, we know that it's our number one team's not out there. It looks like Matt must be dropping off a bit. So I'll try to keep him on, or hopefully not annoy you guys with too much beeping. But
yeah, I'm here.
They said that every player that came out, they said, hey, you're not watching our first string. Our first string is sitting out this game. But just so you know, you are watching the Panthers. These second and third string backup guys, like, they might not make the team, but they are definitely Panthers today. So make sure you cheer for them. And I'm like, we're watching on TV first off, bro. So even if we are cheering, they're not hearing it. And it was just weird. Like, why would you have so many public service announcements about it? Like, were they going to be concerned? You know what was concerning? How many missed field goals I've seen in the preseason.
Well, see, they might, because then if you're watching thinking, oh, the team's going to be good, and then you see that they're just doing wrong, you're like, well, I'm not watching them this year. Well, cancel my TV subscription.
I think most people know and understand preseason. They've been watching that garbage for however many years now. Like, if you're going to even have it, and you're putting it on the local broadcast, I just don't understand why not NFL just stream it? Why still have the NFL Network? Like Dish TV or Direct TV or both, whatever they are. Well, I don't know who their deals with, but both of them are bleeding cash and are almost bankrupt, I think, the last I saw. So, like, you still have a deal with them? Like, quit, knock it off. Make your thing like Netflix or whatever and sell it for like $10 a month. Because realistically, what is that package? Wasn't it like $200 and something a year?
No, it was ridiculous.
And that's just for, I mean, I don't even know. Like, so if you did that, divide that, like, that's like what, $20 something a month? I don't even know how many people would pay that. Because year round, you're not watching it. Let's be honest. So do they jack up the monthly cost to where it's like $40 or $50 during the season so you can watch every game? I don't know. I just don't understand why they don't have that option. Like, oh, your only option is to listen to the radio. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, and they also had a thing here that I thought that you might like this. They talked about their conditioning, Matt. And you know what their conditioning guy said? He said that he's been telling his players that they're only on the field for a total of 15 minutes for the entire game or whatever the hell it was. It was something like that. You know how they always say, there's only 7 minutes of action in an NFL game. He's like, so all you have to do is be able to give your best for 15 minutes and you'll be good. And I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? Like, it's not 15 minutes in a row. So, like, the guys aren't out there running sprints for 15 minutes. Like, you have hour breaks, especially with the TV, like, commercials and stuff, where they're just standing on the side. So, it was a very weird presentation by the Panthers. And, I mean, I've watched other preseason games where they don't have anything like that. I don't know if it was, like, a thing of COVID where they're like, hey, we don't have, like, our traditional practice insights because we weren't allowed there to have footage and stuff. But, like, that was their team. They had a lot of draft stuff, which I thought was okay. But just the first team not playing and then not really talking about anything else, I thought it was weird. But I'll let you talk now. Did you see any preseason games that you watched?
Well, being that I do have NFL Network as part of my cable package, I watched a pile of the preseason games. And pretty much saw the snooze fest of the Chicago and Dolphins with the start of Justin Fields. I think it's going to put Chicago in a tough spot because I think for as high as they drafted him, I think they're going to try to force the issue with him, and I don't think that he's ready.
Are you serious? Because everyone has been talking about how ready he is and how the Broncos made a gigantic mistake not drafting him over one preseason.
Well,
you didn't see LeBron calling him out?
The Broncos were looking like the team of destiny.
Nah, that's just
Minnesota.
Yeah, but I have a wise man once told me that the Lions went 4-0 in preseason and then went 0-16 in the regular season.
Well, that wise man's probably correct.
I bring that up because someone did tell me that, and then I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not going to fact check that because I'm not going to fact check the Lions losing season, but I believe you.
But obviously, I think that's always, you'll see some of those teams, they're trying to build a competitive base, so you try to do it during the preseason. So I can totally understand why, if you have a younger team like a Detroit or like Cleveland has been over the last 2 decades, they've consistently won in the preseason, but then once you hit the regular season and those veteran starters and star players that you're not playing right off the bat come in, it's ultimately a game changer.
Well, I almost wonder do you think that they end up playing their starters against the second team for these other teams, and it's just a mismatch then, where they're winning because their starters are getting more reps, and then when the other team puts their starters in the regular season, it kind of just flip-flops it. I don't know. Sometimes I think it's depth, too. Because some of those teams have the depth, but like you had said, they're always hovering around that middling range where they need a star player. And then it always seems like they're drafting high. Oh, don't worry, once we're drafting in the top 5, we're going to have that star player. We're going to get that star player. And then it never happens. So they're always in that cycle. Because you have to be able to lure free agents, which the Lions haven't done. Let's be honest. Even this year when they traded quarterbacks, they had to do a trade to get that done. And I think that makes a key thing. Even the Steelers traded for the Jaguars linebacker. I thought that came out of nowhere for a 6th-round pick to give Devin Bush some help. So I'm glad that they got that move in. But a lot of teams, they don't make moves like that. So it's almost a surprising. I wonder what Jacksonville was thinking, where they're yeah, we really need a 6th-round pick, It just seemed like an odd deal for them to make. But I'll take it. Hopefully it works out for the Steelers. I think I had one more thing from the Steelers, too, by the way. Claypool was injured today. I was looking to see if there was any update on that. It was a leg injury. They carried him off. But I have all kind of other stuff up here. I don't know if Sports Illustrated, Sports Illustrated is basically just a fan blog now. Did you notice that?
No.
All of their writers are gone. So it's kind of just another blog. And, I mean, looking at their podcast, I think we get, on ours, we could get more downloads than what they have. So we should probably work out a deal with them. We can just take over their coverage. But he suffered a lower body injury. He was taken off with Ben Roethlisberger, but it didn't really say what it was. So I'm hoping that he's okay. But if not, it's all right, where's Ben going to have? What weapons is he going to have? They already had drop problems. I think Claypool helped balance that out. Who knows? If he's gone, what happens? Some people are saying it's a scary injury, but is it scary just because he got carried off? Someone said it was an apparent injury. Really? Players just get helped off the field all the time?
Yes.
So,
he ate too much Wendy's.
Hey, why is that guy getting carried? Oh, I think he has an injury. Oh, I'll write that down. Apparent injury. I don't even know. So, did you see the stuff I was talking about in any of your preseason stuff, where they made sure that you knew that the backups were in?
Well, I felt like they said some of it, but it wasn't like they were making a public service announcement. It was just preseason, and
it wasn't they would. Hey, here's Sam Darnold. Just so you know, he would be the starting quarterback, but starting quarterbacks aren't playing today. Actually, none of the starters are playing. This is the second team that you're watching on the field. So, Sam Darnold, why don't you tell us about it? And he'll say, "Oh yeah, even though the number ones are playing, there's still the Panthers out there. But here I am. I'm just working out a little bit." And it showed him working out. And I'm like, "What am I watching here?" And then they were like, well, you didn't have a good season with the Jets, but the Jets were horrendous, to give you some credit. And I'm like, what is this? You like just trashing the Jets?
Propaganda. Trying to prop up.
Trashing the Jets on your own broadcast. It's like, Panthers, you weren't much better.
You were the winner. You were a winner.
Yeah.
That's why we brought you in.
We brought you in. Like, we saw that you were on a bad team, and we thought, well, we can't leave you hanging out there. I did have one other thing that kind of came up. So I've been watching like the Aaron Rodgers saga and stuff. Nothing really happened there, but Deshaun Watson hasn't been playing. His lawyer said that, or not his lawyer, but the lawyer that's like have all those lawsuits against him. He said that he was talking to like the FBI. I don't know how much of that is bullshit, because it seems like the guy keeps making all these claims and nothing happens. But I almost wonder if he's just going to be untouchable. Because like if there is an investigation and the NFL knows about it and it comes out like a year down the road or two, like what do you do? Like I don't even know, because like their coach put out a thing and said like, oh, he's doing everything we asked him to do. So it's almost like they kind of know. And so they just asked him to stay with the team, but don't do anything. But I don't know. It's weird.
Stay ready.
Well, because like the NFL has so much bad publicity, and even with like with all the coronavirus coverage this year, that if they have a star quarterback in the league that has a big scandal, it's going to be all over television, nonstop. Like I think they were begging for Aaron Rodgers to switch teams, and when it didn't, all of that stuff kind of just stopped immediately. You didn't hear him talk about him. You didn't see it much anymore. Now it's like little tidbits, like you actually have to search Aaron Rodgers. His name doesn't really come up. But it's like, all right, so I wonder if this is the next big thing. And it worries me, because like you have all these players and like doing all the stuff, like what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Like, is Aaron Rodgers going to come back? Where is Deshaun Watson going to go? Is he even going to have a choice in it? Because one of the girls came out, it was another new anonymous lady. I don't know if you saw this one. And that's why I brought it up, because she came out and said that she's hoping that a decision's made before he switches teams, because if he switches teams, she said that he's going to be out there with a brand new slate of women to like pursue or whatever that might not know that this is going on. And so she was trying to like get it back in the news so that people were aware. And I was like, I don't know, to have all these random, because she was anonymous too. So the anonymous ones, it's kind of like, all right, we understand, but by this time you would think the court would pick it up. And do you not play him all year? Like, as a franchise, like, what do you do at that point? I don't even know what they would do. Because if no other team's going to like be interested, because they're not, they're going to be like, all right, we'll wait and see what happens. But at some point, like, something has to change. Like, he can't be under allegations for like 3 years, because it's been an entire year, I think. Didn't it start last year?
Yeah, it was in the off season.
Yeah, last year, right? Or was it only this year?
It was this year in the off season.
See, I was thinking that it came up last year. I'm going to look it up here just to make sure, because I thought that no. It started March 30th, 2020. So it's been a year and a half, basically. So, like, at what point, Matt, does it actually go through a court? Or, like, is he just going to not do anything for, like, 3 years? Because I don't know what would happen. It's going to be in the news cycle.
Well, I don't know how long they're waiting as far as, like, the lawyers have to get all of the people who are going to be involved in this.
I mean, I guess the gymnastics one took forever, so I don't know. I don't want to keep harping on it, but that was the other big news that has been kind of out there that, like I said, you can't really find any details on it. And then whenever I was looking at it, like I said, like it just seemed like it's been over a year. You're bringing in the FBI now. There's either something there or there's not. So, like, is he going to play it all this year? And I know it was only the first week of preseason, so we'll see. Because I bet if he plays and they have even, like, fans in the stands, I wonder if you're going to see protesters against him. but that would be a weird situation. Haskins, I guess, played all right for the Steelers. Switching topics a little bit. Didn't really get to see him. Like I said, I honestly thought coming out into the NFL, if you go back and listen to our show, I thought he was going to be a decent quarterback in the NFL because of his accuracy. And that seems to be, he's pretty accurate still on some of the shorter passes, but I think he hesitates a little bit, which throws him off. So it's going to be almost like a mind thing for him. If he can learn enough to get up to speed, and with the Steelers offense where it's kind of quarterback friendly because of Ben for however many years he's been running it, I wonder how much he's going to be able to just take that and just steal the backup position from Mason Rudolph. Because Rudolph, I think, still plays it too safe. And so even the clips I saw, it's almost like, yeah, you're leading the team down the field, but it's like in slow motion. Like in the NFL, you have to take shots. And I don't think Rudolph does that enough. But that's my last thing. Anything else you want to talk about for the NFL and preseason stuff?
Well, the NFL in general, I was surprised that they were going with the wristband for like the players who like got the vaccine or didn't get the vaccine. I thought that was an interesting move because I like for as hard as they're pushing that, I was looking to see if the Players Association would step in and try to collectively bargain for.
Did we lose you? I think we might have lost him. Yeah, we did a little bit. So we'll see if we can get him back. But for those that didn't know, in training camp, to keep it clear, it was either if you had the vaccine or if you didn't, you had to wear a wristband.
Get into a bigger issue.
All right, we lost you for a sec, so I was jumping in there. So the wristbands, if you didn't have the vaccine, you had to wear a wristband, right, so they could identify you?
Yes, and you had to be tested more frequently.
Okay. So from there, only, like, I mean, a lot of teams are saying that they had 100% vaccine rate now, or like 70% or whatever, I think. So I think you're starting to see those rates go up. But go ahead. I don't know where we lost you at. I can't remember now.
But I'm just thinking, like, in terms of whether you want to get it or you don't, like, I would think that that's something that you could use the union and collectively bargain for. That if you want 100%, then negotiate it, and then it becomes, this is part of your contract, and just put it in there.
Well, see, the thing with me, and if they're vaccinated and they're not doing the testing, like, that's fine. I think what I'm still confused on is, like, whenever the NBA, they had players that were positive that had been vaccinated, like Chris Paul. Didn't he go through that, I believe? I think that was the player we had talked about.
Well, right. And that's exactly what I was talking about, is that so you get the vaccine and you get COVID, you still got to be out, and they're going to do all that tracing. But if you don't get it, then we're going to vilify you, and you're going to be out. Like, it's almost like they're trying to say, if you don't get it, we're going to strip you of, like, game checks and different stuff, which I don't know how they would do that.
I don't know. It's very lose-lose to me. Like, someone can't explain it to me where I know that they need to trace or whatever and see, like, okay, well, you still might give it to other people. Like, that's fine. But if everyone's vaccinated and they're not going to really get sick from it, I mean, how much do you keep testing?
Yeah.
Because if they're worried about, like, the refs and stuff, because at this point, if it's the coach, because, like, even in the college, you had that Washington State coach that he said he's not getting vaccinated. And so, like, they've been, like, trying to keep players away from him or whatever. Like, all right, that's fine if you don't want to be by the players, but then I think that should be reflected on you when your next negotiation comes up, you know what I mean? Like, if your players are playing like shit and you're like, oh, yeah, well, you know the coronavirus. It's like, yeah, but you could have got vaccinated and actually, like, had some contact with them, but you didn't do that. So sometimes it's kind of, like, on that person. Like, I don't understand a ref being like, oh, these players need to be vaccinated. Are you vaccinated? Like, well, oh, no. It's like, okay. Well, if you're vaccinated, I think that like, if they're going to push for it. But, like, I don't understand, like, the testing and stuff. It still doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that stood out to me, and I just thought, well, there's more things where you're overstepping into something that doesn't need. And ultimately, we both know that it boils down to people want the NFL fans to be in the seats, and they want to make that money that they lost from last year not having fans in the stadium. So
100%.
It's like they're hedging themselves, trying to strong arm everyone to do that.
And that's why it's almost like you're putting the players all this other pressure on them, but then you're letting fans in. It's the same exact thing I had with like the College World Series and stuff, where wasn't it North Carolina State that got kicked out because their team had it because some guys weren't vaccinated, but they weren't testing the fans. They weren't testing the other team or whatever because they were supposedly vaccinated. How much in hindsight does that look like bullshit now? Because now you're learning that vaccinated players could have it. You didn't test Vanderbilt. How do you know Vanderbilt didn't get NC State guys sick? Like everyone was like, oh, well, look at NC State, like they got the sickness or whatever. But now you find out like, oh, vaccinated players could have been passing it the entire time. So it really didn't matter. And so in hindsight, it's almost like, all right, well, how many of these rules are they just putting in place and not updating them based on the science that's out there? So that's my one thing. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I hate the coronavirus talk. But that's just to keep everyone else up to date. Like that's kind of where the NFL is going to go. Last year at this point, I was worried when we set up fantasy football that we weren't even going to have that many games. Like I honestly thought that they were going to cancel some and for the money. I mean, basically they pushed through and had every single game, I think, right?
Yes.
I know college dropped a bunch, but like in the NFL, they were kind of like, this is a job. It's not like Walmart guys are, canceling their day. Like, could you imagine if like the local grocery store was like, hey, yeah, we had a positive test. We have to shut down for 7 days. Like that would never happen. They would get driven out of business. So like the NFL is a business. So if people are going to not get vaccinated or they're going to be sick or whatever, they'll just sign some dude off the practice squad. Most fans don't even know the players, man. Most fans don't know the guys. They still talk about, hey, remember when Terry Bradshaw was out there throwing the ball around? Yeah, perfect. Like, yeah, Lynn Swann, he was great. And I'm like, Lynn Swann? He was retired before I was born, basically. Like, these are the guys you're talking about. Because, you talk to a bunch of Steelers fans and see. Like, they ask, like, oh, yeah, we know some of the guys. But, like, even the diehard fans, like, they're only going to know the guys. And I think you can see it in the stadium. Most people have, like, the same couple of jerseys. It's not like they're throwing in jerseys of, like, the backup wide receiver or something. Like, you get, like, the 3 or 4 guys, and everyone knows those guys. And those are the guys they blame the games on. Like, oh, it's Roethlisberger. He's been here. He's such a bomb. He's been here for however many years. He's been losing since that Super Bowl loss, whatever. And so they wouldn't even know. They wouldn't know if, like, the second string cornerback was playing because of a coronavirus sitting out. But I wonder I really hope that they don't shift the game times like last year. Remember when they, like, postponed that Steelers-Ravens game to, like, a Wednesday night? But
yes,
crazy. And then that messed everything up with like fantasy and stuff. But I know we were going to talk about fantasy. I really didn't have much more this week because fantasy drafts are coming up. The season doesn't start till what I said, the 9th, 7th. It's like in September. So like in terms of just starting to look down through my checks, it seems like there are a lot of people. I wanted to get a week in preseason. So we're going to have one more week so I can actually start to look at some data for some of these rookies and see, are they actually performing? Who should you take? Because other than that, right now, my key to you is to just take an old draft card, cover up the year, and then give it to all your buddies so that they don't know what year they're looking at, and maybe you can kind of take advantage of them. Like give a 2015 draft ranking card to all your friends, and then watch them draft like Le'Veon Bell real high. Maybe I'll send that out this year. You think that would work?
Oh man, this one's the one that's gonna work. Why is Neil O'Donnell ranked so high?
Cordell Stewart, is he a wide receiver or is he a quarterback this year?
You can put him at flex.
Oh, speaking of, I don't think, did I mention it? Tim Tebow. My man, they wrote an article about how he didn't really do much in the preseason game, and then he got cut. And I'm like, are you surprised? Like, I don't know if he's going to make it to like the practice squad or whatever, but Tim Tebow comes in. When Tim Tebow got there, how much of that spotlight was taken off Trevor Lawrence? All of it.
Lots.
So everything was about Tim Tebow. And you know it was. They were even writing articles today about how Tim Tebow, and this can be my segue into like college football stuff, but Colin Cowherd was using it as like a call out where he's saying that like most of the SEC's top players don't pan out in the NFL. And he was saying like, they talk about it being like the minor league NFL, but how many of the guys actually turn into studs? Because there are some that are like, okay, they're serviceable players, or like they might be all pros or whatever. But in terms of like guys like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, like no SEC guys since like what someone said. Well, Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning hasn't played for like what 5 years now. So like even in terms of just quarterbacks, like where are all the SEC guys coming from? And then it made me think like even legendary guys that they weren't really from the SEC. And I think he listed a bunch more, like Jerry Rice coming from like smaller schools, Terrell Owens, guys like that. Randy Moss, he went to Marshall and Florida State, like not SEC. So it was an interesting thing because you hear about how all the SEC guys, but I wonder how much of that is because the SEC push has really been recent. So are those schools going to catch up, and you're going to start to see more SEC success in the NFL? But I mean, like Nick Saban's been at Alabama for how many years now? Like a decade or so? Over a decade? Yeah. You would think that he would have one star quarterback. Look how many Dabo's been putting in. Trevor Lawrence, now Deshaun Watson. Like those are legit starters. Nick Saban hasn't really put one in. Tua, maybe, but he hasn't been named the starter. He's like not Deshaun Watson, you know. So,
well, wait till Mac Jones goes off in New England.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Did you have anything else on the NFL before I switch in?
No.
Well, continuing in that thing, there's been rumors of an alliance. Did you see this? I don't even know if I sent it to you. Where the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 all got together, and they're starting to talk about a scheduling alliance against the SEC. So what do you think of that? What do you think that would mean?
Nothing.
Because The Athletic today, or maybe it was yesterday, they put out an article. They said it was free, which I hate how they do this. Hey, here, read our free article, and once you read it, like the first part's free, and then they want you to pay. But the gist of it was that they think that the TV networks are willing to pay for premium cross-conference matchups, like non-conference matchups. And I wonder how many of those, like this year, Clemson plays Georgia again, right? I think. Like, I wonder how many of those cross-conference matchups where if the SEC goes to a 9-game schedule now that they have Oklahoma and Texas, and they like to keep their cupcakes, if they pretty much, like Florida and Florida State just ends. And so, like, Florida State now picks up maybe USC, because maybe Fox will pay however many millions of dollars for a Florida State-USC matchup. Like, that'd be a great one. And if they do this alliance and they actually schedule the games and they use it to, like, boost up their portfolio, I wonder how much of that's really going to actually affect some of the SEC viewership. And
not at all.
You don't think it will?
No.
So, because some guy did the research already for me, so I have some numbers for you. Their threshold, they said that they like to see for primetime games is 4 million viewers, Matt. 4 million. So we'll start with this so I don't forget to bring the numbers in. So over the past 5 years, someone compiled the number. How many teams do you think average over 4 million viewers a game?
Not many.
3. Do you know who they are?
Notre Dame.
Nope.
Then I don't know.
You know, it's the big 3, Matt. Ohio State, Alabama, and Michigan. The only 3 teams that average over 4 million viewers a game. Notre Dame is 4th. So you were close with them. And they're at 3.61 million. But they're on that crummy NBC schedule, and now they're getting thrown on Peacock. Like I had told you, that's probably going to be a raw deal for them, because how are they going to pitch numbers? So in terms of like the big money matchups, you can throw Ohio State out against someone. Someone had said that they boosted. So Ohio State played TCU, I think these are from the past 5 years. So they played them in 2017, I think. They had 7 million viewers for that game, and it boosted TCU's TV profile by millions of viewers. So like if you got rid of that game, TCU would have dropped like 13 spots or something. Like that's how crazy it was in terms of like just getting one of those big 3 teams on your schedule. And like how much of the Notre Dame, I wonder if 10 years ago, before they started to do this ACC alliance, I bet Notre Dame would have been averaging over 4 million viewers. Because like, of course, this is only games that are televised, so they might not show. But I mean, like, how many games? Michigan has a shit ton of games on TV that most people won't watch. Like their games against like Army. Who else do we play that's like a garbage team that like most people wouldn't watch? Like Central Michigan and stuff, like those are on TV. They've had non-conference matchups against like Utah, Colorado in the past 5 years. Now they're supposed to have Oklahoma and Texas, which I think will probably be gone. I don't think Texas and Oklahoma are going to keep playing those games against Michigan, and Ohio State, I think, scheduled them too. So I think both those games will be out. The 5th team I would have thought would have been Texas. Texas is 13th, Matt. They only average 2.2 million viewers a game. So for all the people that think Texas is like bringing big time viewers to the SEC, the Longhorn Network was such a bust that that's an embarrassing low number. Like Florida State has been how bad for the past 5 years? They were just below Texas with 2.23. And like that wasn't even a peak Florida State team. Yikes.
But that doesn't that doesn't surprise me as far as Texas's numbers, because Texas hasn't been Texas since Vince Young was there, or Colt McCoy. And I think if Texas really is able to win, and I don't know what it's going to take for them to do it, but I think that could be your gateway to having a strong Texas, could be that deciding factor in pumping up some TV numbers.
So just to round this out, because I didn't want to just stop at like the 4 million number with Notre Dame. So if you continue a little bit, LSU's 5 and Auburn are 6. They both are slightly over 3 million viewers. And so after that, there's a big drop off, and where you start to just see everyone. Most of the other big teams down through like USC and Tennessee, Tennessee's at 1.8, but the rest are about, even Michigan State's like over 2 million, like they're around Florida State's 2 million. Penn State's in that range, Florida, Wisconsin. Like there's a big mix in there with Texas and all them. Clemson's in there. So it's not just SEC, but you have the top 3, which are 2 Big Ten teams in the SEC, Notre Dame, which would be part of the alliance. So I would think that a lot of TV networks would be salivating over, hey, you have 3 of the top 4 teams. Why don't you bet on us? Because I didn't even realize CBS is going to lose the SEC, Matt. And I think the reason I think I knew that they were going to, but I wasn't 100% sure. In 2024, when Texas and Oklahoma join, they're strictly going to be on ABC and ESPN. So like, there's going to be a big bidding war, I would imagine, for the rest of these conferences. Like, I don't think unless the SEC pulled in Ohio State, Michigan, or Notre Dame, I don't think there's a lot of other teams that can move the needle for them, because like you said, you're not going to get the big time matchups. And even once you start to get that many good teams, you're going to have a losing record. People are going to look at that. They're not going to watch a 6-loss Texas. They just haven't been in the Big 12. Why would they start? Yeah. Because they're in the SEC. Like, you're going to get the same viewers, but outside of that, it's not going to really help them.
But I think you may get a little bit of a bump just from people that are like, hey, Texas is in a new conference, and maybe if they're playing some of those lower tier teams from the SEC, maybe we can make some noise.
Well, surprisingly, I did some research on this. Texas has seen almost no bump. Oklahoma's recruiting has started to go through the roof. They're almost on, and I know it's still early and they haven't, some of these are for like 2 or 3 years out. They're getting close to Alabama and Ohio State level now. So like if they're able to get that bump to the point where you put Alabama in the East, and now instead of just having everyone think that the SEC is Alabama with a few teams mixed in, then you really have an East versus Alabama versus Oklahoma, and you're able to schedule them so where they don't play until the championship game. Do they throw the loser into the playoffs? Like if you have two undefeated teams and one of them has a 1 loss, I would think that loser is going to play in the playoffs, right?
Well, they've shown that they're willing to do it.
So I think that that's going to be the only thing that's scary is if you stick with the 4-team playoff and you start throwing in cross-conference matchups because like, Florida State and USC look perfect on paper. Like that might be a good matchup, but what if they both won the conference? What if USC and Florida State both won their conferences and then in the playoffs they said, well, you know what? They already played head-to-head and USC won, so Florida State's not going to get in this year. That's a real scenario that could happen. And that's my only concern. Like, I would like to see the Big Ten drop to 8 games if they're going to do this and kind of tell the SEC, like, your move. Did you just split up your conference payouts to bring in Texas and Oklahoma and they're not even going to play that many games? Because Oklahoma said they would like to keep scheduling Oklahoma State. My other thing that I noticed, no one has mentioned the Big 12 teams that are remaining. The Big 8, Little 8, or whatever. I don't know what the hell they're calling them. Forgotten 8, I think is what I saw. So, like, and West Virginia's in there, and I have a soft spot for West Virginia. I had some family members go there, and they always played Pitt pretty well. So, like, let me just look at some of their numbers here. West Virginia, they were 30th in TV viewers, right around Mississippi State and Virginia Tech. And like Mississippi State had some pretty good years in that range, I would think. Plus they got Mike Leach, so you know that they're bringing in the casual viewers. Pitt, 42, not even a million. They're at 781,000. And they're above North Carolina though, which I told you North Carolina doesn't even get that many fans. So, but I don't know how many primetime games North Carolina would have even had, or even Pitt, because some of these, like you're looking at Pitt numbers. Have they ever been on ABC? Maybe once or twice a year they play Penn State or Clemson. That was it. And if it's on ESPN, then guess what? It's not getting those numbers. So some of it's kind of like a self-fulfilling thing where, oh yeah, Michigan has every single game on ABC. So does Ohio State. They just flip what time it's on. One of them plays at noon. One of them plays at 3:30 until they both play each other at noon. And that's the most watched game. The same guy. I don't know if this is the same guy. Let me see if I have the numbers. No, he didn't. I saw someone else that put like the top 15 watched games over the last, like 5 years or whatever. And it was like all 5 of the Michigan Ohio State games were in the top 10. And then there were like some Michigan Penn States, some Ohio State Penn States, and then a couple Alabama Auburns. And like that was the list. You could have just named off rivalry games in the Big Ten. I was like, oh, interesting. Like some of these other people are polling. Like I'm telling you, if I'm Florida State and I'm Clemson, I'm not jumping into the SEC because I don't think you benefit until you know what the playoffs are going to be like. Because I still think that you're going to get a scenario where they put all of their games into one big playoff, and they're not going to cut off all these other states. Like you're not going to cut off Utah. You're not going to cut off Oregon. You're not going to cut off California. And they're not going to watch your playoffs. It's just not going to happen. So like you're going to have to keep those teams around, and whether they're able to get enough money from ESPN, like is ESPN going to be willing to just pay millions of dollars over value for all these college teams just to play each other? I don't think so. And if they did, what would stop them from saying like, all right, we're going to cut Mississippi State from the conference because they're bringing us nothing. Or we're going to cut Ole Miss. And then like eventually then who's left? Are they just going to start cutting schools? Because like, yeah, Vanderbilt's a great school, but we're tired of paying for them because they don't win anything except for baseball. I don't know. That's my last thing that I had for that. Do you have anything else?
No.
I think I had, Let me see. Let me check my notes because I just wanted to talk about the alliance and why I don't think it will matter. Like I wasn't really talking about realignment, but the alliance is something that's a little bit different because people think that they're going to cut out the SEC in terms of like these non-conference deals or these games, but realistically, does it matter? They really don't play that many northern teams anyway. So it's not like the SEC always has big-time non-conference matchups with the Big Ten anyway. The ACC more has rivalry games that they would lose. Georgia and Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, South Carolina, and Clemson. Would changing those to a different conference matchup, say they did an ACC Big Ten Challenge, which has been successful for TV networks in basketball, would that offset those other rivalry games? I don't know. I mean, it definitely wouldn't be regionalized. Are there enough fans that hate Ohio State? Yeah, like if Clemson played Ohio State, I think that would be a big rivalry game. But at what point does that hurt them in trying to get to the playoffs, where one of them has an extra loss and the committee just leaves the loser out? I don't know. Like Clemson playing Georgia, they might think like, well, Georgia always chokes, so we're definitely going to beat them. and that won't matter. Like they're not scheduling Alabama because they're like, yeah, we'll probably play them again. Georgia barely makes the playoffs in 30 years, so we can schedule them. That'll be an easy game to pump us up. It's the same reason why Alabama schedules like Penn State. No offense to Penn State. But you throw that game in, and then that way you're ready to play Ohio State, and they knock Penn State down a peg when they blow them out. And then when Ohio State beats Penn State by like 2, they're like, oh yeah, but Alabama killed them in Happy Valley, so what's the difference? You know? Strategically, they played that after the Paterno scandal. I don't know when it was scheduled, but just throwing that out there. They threw out the top 100 coaches of like the past 50 years. And some of them, like they had Barry Switzer much lower than like Dabo Sweeney. And I'm like, why? He didn't have as many championships, didn't have a good record. The only reason you have him higher is because he's ESPN, like you're paying him right now. That's the only reason. Like you can't just look at the data. Like at some point when you're putting these lists together, how about you just use the numbers? Like you put Nick Saban number 1 because he has all the national championships, but then you're like, well, Dabo's higher because like he raised Clemson and not Oklahoma. Like, okay. Is it based on the team? Because Nick Saban didn't really win at Michigan State. They had his highlight for Michigan State. He beat number 1 Ohio State. That was his one highlight. And I guess he had a top 10 finish or something, which I don't remember because it was like one of the years after Michigan won the national championship. So it's like, okay, what else did he win? So I don't know. That was my other thing I saw. Did you have anything else on college football?
Nope, not right now.
All right. That's pretty much it for the show. I did have something for the final bell that's kind of related that just kind of annoys me. So I was out and, like I wear Michigan gear sometimes and you don't even notice it, So like you have the gear on and someone comes up to you and they're like, hey, is that a Michigan M? And you're like, what? Oh, yeah, it is. And then they flash like a rival, like, oh, yeah, we're rivals. It's like, oh, yeah, you're excited for like whatever the football is. So I start talking right about football, And then I get the look of like just eyes glossed over. And they're like, oh, are you guys having a good football team? Like, I don't really watch football. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Why did you even bring up the rivalry then? I wouldn't even have noticed you. Like, why would you come up to someone, start a conversation and say, hey, we're rivals. And then I start talking because I'm thinking football season's coming up. And even if you're talking basketball, why not just say, oh, yeah, I meant basketball, buddy? Not like, oh, no, yeah, I don't know. People just tell me that we're rivals, so I have the shirt.
They just think you're rivals.
Like, yeah, I noticed I'm Michigan M and I hate you. It's like, oh, why? It's like, they tell me to. Like, who's telling you? Like, you can't even hold a conversation. And then, of course, I feel awkward because then I'm like, oh, man, I'm like one of those asshole fans. They're going to go back to, like, their family and be like, this Michigan guy came up to me and just started talking about their football team. Like, so obnoxious. Because you see those stories all the time. It's like, oh, yeah, so-and-so. Where, meanwhile, people don't even believe, because, like, I talk about, like, Michigan getting all the viewers. Our fans are everywhere. So, like, it doesn't surprise me when someone comes up and they're like, hey, Michigan, sometimes it's like, I don't know, did I tell this on the show? Because sometimes it's like, I don't even know. But we were at the beach last summer, and I ran the Big Ten 10K. I don't know if I told this story, but they gave me like the neck wind racer thing or whatever the hell, but it had all the teams on it. So I was wearing that as my mask because I liked it because you could pull it up and throw it down, the runner sleeve for your neck. I don't know what the hell they're called. But I had it up, and I hear this guy from the bar. He's like outside the bar, like the bouncer or something. And he yells, "Hey, yo, is that Michigan on there?" And I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. This guy is an Ohio State fan because I've been at Disney, Matt, with the family. And I've had guys come up and say, "F Michigan," right to my face. And people are like, "Oh my God, what was that about?" And I'm like, oh, I have my Michigan hoodie on. And they're like, "People just yell at you?" I'm like, "Didn't you see that guy's Ohio State shirt?" Like, you should not even expect anything less. And not just one guy, Matt. Like, you go to Disney, I've had like 5 different dudes yell at me, tell me Michigan sucks, like in front of like at random people. They're like, "Oh my God." And the funny thing is sometimes, because like a lot of my family, like Penn State related, so they'll have Penn State gear on. No word. No one says a word to them. So they're like, why are you getting all this Michigan stuff? Some people cheer for you. So that's what I'm expecting at the beach. So I'm like, shit. I turned around, like, yeah, I said, it's a Big Ten thing. I ran the Big Ten 10K or whatever. And he said, well, I asked you if you're repping Michigan. And I'm like, oh shit. So I'm like, all right, of course I did. I am, of course I'm a Michigan guy. So then he's like, hell yeah, brother. So am I. And so everyone I'm with, they're just standing there. And he's like, "Hey, this is my bar. I own it. Come on in. You can get a shot on the house." So I'm like, I turned around. I'm like, "Hey guys, hold on a second. I'm going to go hang out with this guy." And they're all like, "Are you serious? You're hanging out with this guy?" So I go in and get a shot. We're talking about some of the games and how Harbaugh's been a disappointment, and been like, "Yeah, I was so pumped because I still had student tickets whenever Harbaugh had got hired. And I went to the first Ohio State game, and Ezekiel Elliott just ran all over us. And I remember thinking, like, I thought it was supposed to be better. Like, when I went here when Brady Hoke was playing Ohio State, we were almost winning. Like, we had a 2-point conversion to win the game. And now we were, like, losing 42 to something. So we were talking about that, and then I come out, and everyone was like, why did you go with that guy? Like, what are you doing, dude? What if he would have murdered you? I'm like, a random guy yelling at me for wearing a Michigan thing? And they're like, how did he even see it? I wouldn't even have recognized it. I'm like, people know. So like whenever I get recognized like that and I'm getting free shots or people are yelling in my face and then other people come up and they say, "Hey, we're rivals." And I'm like, all right. And I start trying to talk sports with them and they're like, "Oh yeah, I don't watch sports." It's just uncomfortable to me, Matt. So I wanted to bring it in and talk about it because I wanted to see if you had any experiences like that. Because I'm like, why even bring it up? Why bring it up at all? Because sometimes, like, I have a lot of stuff. Like, I have, like, keychains and stuff. So sometimes I'll have, like, things on that I won't even realize will say Michigan. And then I'll get people yelling at me. And I'm like, oh, wait, my keychain, or whatever. So, but go ahead. Do you have any stories like that?
Well, it's not even necessarily sports related. But I do have that where random people just start telling me, like, things about their life, like they can tell that I'm a counselor, and then it just becomes like, you look like somebody I'm going to tell all my trials and tribulations to, and you laughed about me when I told you this, and it happened. Like within 2 weeks, there was a situation, and I ended up having to put on my counselor hat. So it definitely was something that was going on.
But see, like I only see it for certain teams. Like I had a winter hat that one of my students got me one time. And it was a Steelers hat, and I was wearing it, and I had a guy yell at me outside of like a wing place. You might even have been there. And I'm thinking, what's this guy yelling at me for? And he was like, yeah, Pittsburgh sucks or something. And I was like, what the hell? How did they even know I'm from Pittsburgh or like from Pennsylvania? Because they were in North Carolina at the time. And then I'm like, oh shit, I had the hat on, but it wasn't even like, it didn't have the Steelers logo. It was like a retro guy logo. So I'm almost like, hey, I wonder how I got it. And then I'm always like confused, like, wait, who's he a fan of? Like, at least if it's Michigan, 99% of the time it's an Ohio State fan that's yelling at me. So like, I just know like, oh yeah, I get it, buddy. Like normally Michigan State fans are kind of just like, especially down here. Other fans, like, because I always surprise people like with Wisconsin if I give them like a go blue, because sometimes I see Wisconsin fans, they're always like shocked because like I know that they know what it is, and I like to spook them like that, because for whatever reason, especially when I go on vacation, I see a lot of Wisconsin, so I was just give them a go blue, and then watch their shocked faces. They're like, "What? What are you saying?" I saw a guy running.
And then you have the audacity to wonder why everyone hates Michigan.
Matt, because I'm not yelling at them. I'm just giving them a nice, friendly go blue. Because like
you're just aggressively yelling in their faces.
No, it's like a nice little friendly, like, hey, go blue. Because like if you give them a wave, like you pretend like you know them, then they're like they always kind of open up, and then you can just watch their soul just get sucked from their body when you say go blue to them. See, like if it's an Ohio State fan, they're already on the offensive. They're talking shit, saying like whatever. And if they're old and you throw like a Tim Biakabatuga up, then they were like, what? They don't know what to do.
My face.
Or like, hey, did you see Charles Woodson get in the Hall of Fame with Tom Brady will be next? And then they're like, oh, I don't know what to say to that. So I just wanted to bring it in because football season's coming. So you know there's going to be some trash talk. So like Steelers, like you're going to get it no matter what. If you're out of state, I've seen some Steelers support come up and say like, yeah, Steelers, here we go. Things like that. Some people always compliment like, hey, I like that shirt. Where'd you get it or whatever. But you do get the random fans, and it's hard to pin them down. Like you don't know if it's Ravens fans. Is it Browns fans? Is it just like Patriots fans or someone else? It's hard to tell. But for college, if you're rivals with someone, just don't go up to them and say, hey, I think we're rivals. Because then they're going to expect some sports talk, you know? That's my final bell. You got anything for the final bell?
Final bell. Rule number 1. Don't be weird.
Don't be weird because then everyone feels uncomfortable. Like, that's the one thing. Because then I'm like...
Rule number 1 in my family. Don't be weird.
Because especially if it's outside and, like, let's say you're both waiting in line. Like, even if it's like let's say you're getting ice cream or something where the line's normally, like, only a couple minutes. But then, like, you just had an awkward interaction, and then you're just standing beside them. And then, like, if their family's there or, like, your family's there, and it's like, hey, what'd that guy say to you? It's like, oh, we're rivals. It's like, hey, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. I ask him because he doesn't want to talk anymore. Don't know why he even introduced himself.
He just interjected that, and that's it.
That's what rivals are to some people, Matt. You just tell them, like, hey, we're rivals. And then it's like...
I just want you to know we're out there.
Because it's better than, like, because you said about being a counselor. It'd be better, like, what if someone came up to you and said, hey, we're rivals, and you're like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'm a better counselor than you. Like, I think that would hit hard. I can't even talk anymore. I'm too long in this show. Hit home more. Like, you'd be like, okay, all right, now I got to look this guy up. Like, I think that would be mind games. But just to be like, we're rivals, and you're like, oh yeah, and then they're like, no, I don't care. I don't know why I brought that up.
But you could just say you're rivals, and then I wouldn't care because I'd already know that by not knowing you, I'm better than you.
Because like it'd be funny if like someone said that next time. That's what I'm going to do next time. If it's like a Michigan State fan or like a Penn State fan, and they say we're rivals, I'm going to say no, we're not really. And then just
really just up your arrogance. There you go.
And then that will give him something to talk about instead of saying like, hey, I saw this Michigan guy. It was very uncomfortable. I said we're rivals, and he started talking about football. It really caught me off guard. He'll be like, no, he just said no, we're not. Like how arrogant of him. So that's my new thing. So if you're a fan of that, because like Penn State and Pitt fans, they could do the same thing. Like if a Penn State fan came up, or if a Pitt fan came up to a Penn State fan and they're like, hey, we're rivals, Penn State could just say no. And you know that would infuriate Pitt fans, especially ones that were alive in like the Dan Marino era. Right now it kind of makes sense. But Pitt, for whatever reason, kind of like nuked their program and went all in on basketball. And their football program hasn't been the same since. So even if they had an alliance with like Penn State and they played every year, I don't think it would really matter. I don't even know if that would start to draw fans or not. That might just be too regional at this point. But that's it. You have anything else?
That's it.
All right. Preseason number 2, get some fantasy football stuff in next week. And hopefully we'll get some more college stuff as things get ironed out. People are talking about like there's going to be some big movement in conferences and stuff, but I don't think so. The BYU stuff I mentioned earlier, that's going to be something big that we're going to have to watch on. And like players skipping high school now to try to sign NIL stuff, that's crazy. But some of that's not sustainable. So go to southboundsports.com, check it out. We're getting into football season. Tell your friends, if they only listen to our football season, start downloading again. And we'll see you next week.